Serious. What are some of the creepiest declassified documents made available to the public? Operation Northwoods. Proposed false flag attacks against American civilians/targets carried out by the CIA and blamed on Cuba in 1962. Thankfully JFK said F no and shut that poop down. Apparently, JFK even demoted the guy who proposed this on the spot. Thank God. Also, this means that this idea had to go through a long chain of command with many high-ranking people in the government agreeing to it. Do you know if this was when Allen Dulles was still running the CIA? If so, I'm not entirely surprised. Him and John Foster Dulles were some bizarre figures who enacted all sorts of problematic plans under Eisenhower. Dulles briefly lingered under JFK, if memory serves, but I think it was the Bay of Pigs that finally got him the boot. The Brothers by Stephen Kinzer does a great job of giving a biography of them and their actions under Eisenhower. Allen Dulles was head of the CIA, while his brother was Secretary of State, and it was a dangerous combination that led to the US supporting the overthrow of governments through a series of coups in places like Guatemala, Jacobo Arbenz, Iran, Mohammad Mossadegh, Indonesia, Sukarno, and the Congo, Patrice Lumumba. The intel community basically worshipped the memory of Dulles and everything he did. He was pretty much the father of modern intelligence gathering, didn't give a shit how it was done, and instilled roots in multiple branches and departments, some of which are still heavily embedded today. There's a reason most legit JFK assassin theorists still think the CIA is the closest, the most potential. Let's just say, when JFK fired Dulles it sent a warning shot across government lifers, and at that point the intel community basically had no accountability, so they weren't too keen to have some pretty boy in office trying to chest thump. JFK isn't really liked much in intel community. One thing you don't even want to pretend to mess with is a government agent's panshan, especially multiple agencies worth. Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, was subjected to grueling degrading psychological experiments while he was an underage student at Harvard. Whenever I see him brought up I like to repost this quoting user Yofo Majojo from this thread. At the start of the Cold War, Henry Murray developed a personality profiling test to crack Soviet spies with psychological warfare and select which US spies are ready to be sent out into the field. As part of Project Encultura, he began experimenting on Harvard sophomores. He set one student as the control, after he proved to be a completely predictable conformist, and named him Lawful. Long story short, the latter half of the experiment involved having the student prepare an essay on his core beliefs as a person for a friendly debate. Instead, Murray had an aggressive interrogator come in and basically tear his beliefs to pieces, mocking everything he stood for, and systematically picking apart every line in the essay to see what it took to get him to react. But he didn't. It just broke him, made him into a mess of a person, and left him having to pull his whole life back together again. He graduated, but then turned in his degree only a couple years later, and moved to the woods where he lived for decades. In all that time, he kept writing his essay, and slowly, he became so sure of his beliefs, so convinced that they were right, that he thought that, if the nation didn't read it, we would be irreparably lost as a society. So, he set out to make sure that everyone heard what he had to say, and sure enough Lawful's Industrial Society and Its Future has become one of the most well-known essays written in the last century. In fact, you've probably read some of it. Although, you probably know it better as the Unabomber Manifesto. I think there was a lot of creepy things that came out when the East German Stasi files were released after the Berlin Wall fell. All citizens were allowed to view their own files and many were shocked to find out that their own relatives were informing on them because they had no choice, and various other things. A good movie about this is called The Lives of Others. Gabon. It was a weapon speculated by the USA in the 90s that, when dropped, would release pheromones which would make the enemy attracted to each other. I love the idea that the enemy would just stop fighting a war and get their frick on. I mean, shouldn't we all at least give it a try? MKUltra, the CIA performing illegal experiments on Americans to try to develop mind control. MKUltra was never declassified, it was leaked, and the CIA destroyed all documents surrounding it. Operation LAC biological warfare testing done on US cities. Principally, the operation involved spraying large areas with zinc cadmium sulfide which is very toxic. Many who were affected died of cancer and the testing was never followed up on. Most of the neighborhood's genetic makeup was fricked up for no reason, and no apologies were made. My mom told me one time she was living in California, they stated they were spraying to get rid of fruit flies/gnats. They woke up and all the fish in their tanks were bleeding out their eyes, and she also had a miscarriage a week later. That story always stuck with me and made me wonder. Project Pluto is pretty horrific. The proposed use for nuclear-powered ramjets would be to power a cruise missile, called SLAM, for supersonic low-altitude missile. In order to reach ramjet speed, it would be launched from the ground by a cluster of conventional rocket boosters. Once it reached cruising altitude and was far away from populated areas, the nuclear reactor would be made critical. Since nuclear power gave it almost unlimited range, the missile could cruise in circles over the ocean until ordered down to the deck for its supersonic dash to targets in the Soviet Union. The SLAM, as proposed, would carry a payload of many nuclear weapons to be dropped on multiple targets, making the cruise missile into an unmanned bomber. After delivering all its warheads, the missile could then spend weeks flying over populated areas at low altitudes, causing tremendous ground damage with its shockwave and fallout. When it finally lost enough power to fly and crash landed, the engine would have a good chance of spewing deadly radiation for months to come. The Russians have been developing hypersonic ramjet nuclear missiles, right now. I'm not a scientist, but they sound like they are pretty much indefensible. I don't know that it was classified, but the audio tape recorded by the Toy Box killer was leaked. David Ray was a US serial killer who tortured, sexually assaulted, and murdered women with electric generators, surgical blades, saws, syringes, etc. He mounted a mirror to the ceiling, so they had to watch. He had a recorded audio tape that he would play for victims once they regained consciousness for the first time. The transcript is here. The Toolbox Killers are a separate pair of serial killers who similarly raped, tortured, and killed women. They also made tape recordings of their crimes. Shirley Ledford's tape is the most well-known one. You can hear them telling her to scream, the killers breaking her elbow with a sledgehammer, and her asking to die near the end. During the trial, the killers claimed it was role-playing, and only evidence of a threesome. Shirley's mother had to identify her daughter's voice on the tape. The full tape was not released, but the transcript was. Holy Mother of God, that's truly evil and chilling. Makes me not want to leave the house. Part of Shirley Ledford's transcript is here. The chief investigator for the case committed suicide later. His suicide note referred to the case still haunting him after all those years. I should not have read that. Well, I certainly know what I'm not going to do. Paradise Papers. Everyone disregards them, but they pretty much call out every single top 0.00001% wealth and super high power elites in the world for being involved with terrorists, child trafficking, money laundering, you name it. If you haven't given them a read, some of your favorite politicians may surprise you. Just to be clear, this isn't people like Bill Gates or Steve Jobs. While they have plenty of shady business practices of their own, they are pretty clean compared to the real ultra-rich. People like Saudi princes and Russian oil barons that don't show up on lists of richest people because they are so secretive we don't even know how rich they are. The ultra-rich who associate with cartels and drug/sex trafficking rings mostly stem from countries more third world than the US due to more lax laws and far less investigative power. You don't have to feel bad about buying an iPhone because Tim Cook might be involved in child sex trafficking. The worst that Apple does is use Chinese sweet shop labor, but unfortunately that's pretty much every company. Not really a document, but a case that the Soviet Union tried to hide for a while, the Nazino affair. Here is part of a eyewitness reported about it. They were trying to escape. They asked us where's a railway? We'd never seen a railway. They asked where's Moscow? Leningrad? They were asking the wrong people. We'd never heard of those places. We're Ostalax. People were running away starving. They were given a handful of flour. They mixed it with water and drank it, and then they immediately got diarrhea. The things we saw. People were dying everywhere. They were killing each other. On the island there was a guard named Koschevenikov, a young fellow. He fell in love with a girl who had been sent there, and was courting her. He protected her. One day he had to be away for a while, and he told one of his comrades, take care of her, but with all the people there the comrade couldn't do much really. People caught the girl, tied her to a poplar tree, cut off her breasts, her muscles, everything they could eat, everything. They were hungry, they had to eat. When Kostya came back, she was still alive. He tried to save her, but she had lost too much blood. Yeah, I looked it up. Basically 6,000 people were on an obscure island in Siberia, ran out of food, and resorted to cannibalism. Spooky.